Spider-Man is not a superhero. Spider-Man wears a suit to hide his identity, catches criminals, saves children, and fights supervillains. Despite all this, he's not truly a superhero. And no, I'm not talking about the stubborn Turkish Spider-Man wielding a sharpener. I'm referring to the classic version and Sam Raimi's film adaptation, which remains the closest to the original. Before 2002, no one really knew how to translate comics to the screen. It was always a gamble, sometimes resulting in good films, but often leading to things like George Clooney's Batman with rubber nipples and Schwarzenegger's Mr. Freeze. No one took comics seriously. It wasn't until the 2002 Spider-Man film with Tobey Maguire that the potential of comic book adaptations was truly realized. This film forced the public to take superheroes seriously, despite Spider-Man himself not fitting the traditional mold. Today, let's talk about how a character named Peter Parker was born, how he paved the way for the modern superhero, and how he met an inglorious end amid cheering crowds. The appearance of each superhero reflects a certain stage of modern history and meets the needs of people at that time. Superheroes emerged in the early 1940s, with Captain America becoming the most popular. He rode the wave of nationalist propaganda and a surge of patriotism, famously punching Hitler on the cover of his comic. However, once World War II ended, Steve Rogers was discarded. No one wanted to read about soldiers anymore. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched the first satellite, which terrified American citizens. This led to the popularity of the Green Lantern, who protected people from space threats. The era of technological progress had arrived, marked by the appearance of the Flash, fast, bright, and a scientist who wore a suit inspired by the premium cars of the mid-50s. The Flash signaled the beginning of the Silver Age of superheroes, reviving the genre. The Fantastic Four emerged, featuring characters who quarreled and dealt with everyday problems, speaking like normal people. They spouted one cliché after another. In his book on the origins of Marvel Comics, Stan Lee wrote, "For the first time in my life, I created a story for myself. If I were a comic book reader, I would want to read it. The characters were relatable, made of flesh and blood, capable of making mistakes. Most importantly, they didn't hide only strength behind their superhero costumes, but also weakness." The more I thought about this concept, the more fascinated I became with realism in comics. The Fantastic Four's sudden popularity paved the way for new characters. Stan Lee then came up with an idea for a new hero based on a fly that buzzed around and crawled on walls. This led to the creation of Spider-Man. The approach was incredibly simple, yet brilliant. Comics were extremely popular among teenagers, so why not make a teenager the hero? A teenager with personal problems. It's amazing that in 20 years of the genre's existence, no one had thought of this before, especially in the 1940s when 90% of comic readers were children. Before Spider-Man, teenagers were merely sidekicks, like Robin. When Stan Lee brought the idea of Spider-Man to Marvel's head, Martin Goodman, he was told it was the worst idea ever. Goodman said, "Superheroes don't have personal problems," but Spider-Man proved that they could, and should. This innovation not only made Spider-Man a relatable and enduring character, but also paved the way for modern superheroes to reflect the complexities of real life. Spider-Man's problems had to be placed in an almost closed log to test audience reactions, and it worked. Out of all the characters, Peter Parker was the most human. He went to school, worked part-time as a photographer, paid rent for a tiny room, and looked after his aunt. He behaved like an ordinary person trying to balance normal life with superhero activities.
Sometimes in the comic book movies, they take a step back from reality, even when dealing with the characters. But I decided to take a different approach and make it as real as possible so that the audience believed that they could believe in this hero, in this man.
When Sam Raimi took on the film adaptation of the comic, he aimed to make the character as realistic as possible. For the same reason, Raimi decided not to give Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man mechanical web shooters. He believed that a high school student wouldn't have been able to invent such a device. Spider-Man is the most popular superhero in the world because he looks like us, because he's not a superhero in the traditional sense. The character of Spider-Man was born at the intersection of genres, blending superhero elements with drama. His conflicts are not epic, but deeply personal and subjective. Raimi approached the film from this angle, focusing on the drama and personal conflict rather than the classic heroic superpowers and paraphernalia. This approach made Spider-Man relatable to each of us. The first thing we hear in the movie is the question, "Who am I?" In the second part, this conflict is elevated to a new level, and Raimi highlights it with a shot of two suits. Peter struggles to choose between being Spider-Man and a normal guy. He doesn't know who he is, what he wants to be, or where his life is heading. Will he succeed with Mary Jane? Will he become a great scientist? Where will his newfound strength take him? And will this path be bright? These doubts plague every sane person. Peter seeks help from a doctor to understand himself, full of anger and contradictory thoughts. He makes many mistakes and cannot be considered an extremely positive character. In the first film, Peter doesn't save the world like a classic superhero. Instead, he tries to earn money to impress a girl, argues with his uncle, and seeks revenge on an enemy, showing his very human flaws. Peter's main enemy is not supervillains wielding fireballs. It's the father of his best friend. Originally, Raimi planned to add Venom to the first film, but he decided to replace him with the Green Goblin to show the conflict between fathers and children, making the story more personal and realistic. The father despises Harry but loves Peter, creating a complex and emotional dynamic. Raimi creates mundane conflicts where heroes are not black and white, but have many facets and nuances. Norman Osborn, for instance, is not purely evil. He tries to give humanity a source of limitless energy and intelligence for the greater good. Similarly, Flint Marko tries to get money for his daughter's operation. Raimi's Spider-Man films explore these human, relatable conflicts, adding depth to the characters and the story. In conclusion, Raimi's Spider-Man is beloved not just because of his superpowers, but because he reflects our own struggles, doubts, and humanity. This approach has made Spider-Man an enduring and iconic character, paving the way for modern superhero films that focus on personal and emotional storytelling. Peter Parker, unlike traditional superheroes, doesn't see things in shades of gray. He attacks villains with unyielding rage, refusing to stay on the sidelines because he knows what happens when he turns a blind eye to problems. In Raimi's adaptation, Peter's belief that he killed Flint Marko fills him with a twisted sense of satisfaction. He tells Aunt May, but she reminds him that Spider-Man doesn't kill, emphasizing the hero's moral code against violence. Raimi, known for his horror films, infuses elements of horror into Spider-Man's world. One of the most intense scenes involves Peter's vengeful pursuit of a robber. It's pure hatred that drives him, and the scene's power lies in its raw, emotional intensity. We hear Peter's muffled screams and see subjective, claustrophobic shots that heighten the tension. Instead of feeling liberated, the web swinging feels constrained and furious. The minimal computer effects and practical shots make Peter's rage palpable as he relentlessly hunts the robber, eventually breaking through glass and throwing him out a window. This single act of revenge is 10 times more powerful than the erasure of billions in Infinity War because it's personal. The conflict is deeply rooted in Peter's soul, making it infinitely significant. I can't relate to the Avengers' cosmic battles, but I understand a teenager burdened with great power. Peter doesn't save the world in a traditional sense. He seeks vengeance for his uncle and intervenes in every fight because he knows the cost of ignoring injustice. Tobey Maguire's portrayal of Peter Parker under Sam Raimi's direction makes the character's struggles incredibly real. Peter is broke, not conventionally handsome, and disrespected at school. He doesn't have a multi-million-dollar suit from Tony Stark or immediate success. Instead, he scrapes by, making his small victories and kind gestures, like leaving $20 for his struggling Aunt May, all the more significant. The main difference between Maguire's Spider-Man and the versions portrayed by Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland is stark. Without the suit, Maguire's Peter Parker is a complete loser, mocked and socially inept. Only when he dons the Spider-Man suit does he become confident and witty. Garfield and Holland's versions, in contrast, always seem somewhat cool, even out of costume. The character of Peter Parker, as envisioned by Sam Raimi in his Spider-Man trilogy, stands out significantly from later portrayals due to his deeply personal and relatable struggles. Raimi's Peter Parker, played by Tobey Maguire, is not just a superhero. He's a reflection of human vulnerability and everyday challenges. Peter's interactions with other characters highlight his desire for a normal life. For instance, his admiration for Dr. Octavius, a charming nerd with a loving wife, underscores Peter's yearning for a quiet life with Mary Jane and a career in academia. The superhero costume, instead of empowering him, often brings immense pain and suffering, symbolizing a wound that never heals. This internal conflict, as Stanley originally intended, hides not just strength, but significant weakness and nerdiness, as best demonstrated in the infamous dance scene in Spider-Man 3. Criticized as cringe-worthy by many, this scene actually illustrates how the symbiote makes Peter feel falsely confident, showcasing what he imagines as cool, because, in his mind, he's still a nerd. The trilogy is often critiqued for its repetition of the damsel in distress trope, but Raimi's direction adds a unique horror element. The transformation scenes and intense close-ups amplify fear and drama, making the films more than just superhero flicks. Iconic scenes, such as Octavius's transformation in the hospital, resonate with pure horror, showing Raimi's flair for the genre. The early Marvel films, including Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, stood out because they were self-sufficient stories that didn't rely on a broader universe, allowing them to conquer audiences with their authenticity and depth. However, the evolution of the Spider-Man franchise saw significant changes. The studio's push for crossovers and mutual PR led to characters like Venom being added against Raimi's wishes, resulting in his departure. The same fate befell Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, with studio pressures leading to a departure from the original vision. Now, Tom Holland's Spider-Man, integrated into the MCU, is more of a typical superhero, far removed from the intimate personal storytelling of Raimi's films. Raimi's Spider-Man focused on relatable, everyday problems, a stark contrast to the epic, universe-spanning conflicts of the modern MCU. While Holland's Spider-Man is enjoyable, it's a different take, more akin to a superhero like Thor or Captain America, rather than the deeply human character Stan Lee originally created. This shift reflects the broader trend in superhero films, where intimate personal stories are overshadowed by grandiose battles and epic stakes. The essence of Raimi's Spider-Man is that he's not just a superhero, but a character with cockroaches in his head. Trivial, everyday problems, like a faulty door. He's a good guy facing real troubles, which made him so relatable and beloved. This portrayal of Spider-Man as a person first and a superhero second is a significant reason why Raimi's trilogy remains so cherished, even as the genre evolves into something much grander and less personal. Thanks for watching.